Did you know that the Russian Empire once extended all the way to the coast of California?
Welcome to Fort Ross.
For people who have been following along on our journey, it might be a little surprising that we are covering a place over here in California, because in our last video, we were all the way on the other side of the world in Delhi. But after 10 months of traveling around the world, we decided to spend some time here visiting friends and family. Keep in mind that since we live in Japan, this is still kind of part of our trip. It's been at least 3 years since we've been here, so we're still a little bit exploring and still checking out California as one option for a place that we can live.
And for me, it's only my second time here in California, and I'm excited to experience the Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas here in America.
But while we're here, we decided to also explore a little bit of the history and talk about some things that people probably don't know about, like the Russian colony. And now we're driving through Sonoma County, which is where I grew up, here in wine country, California. Lots of vineyards and pretty beautiful countryside. Although this part of California, Sonoma County, is mostly famous for its wine, if you've spent any time around the area, you've probably noticed references to the Russian colony already. Things like Russian River vineyards, Russian River brewing, and the Russian River. Now, as we head out to the coast here, it's a pretty windy drive through the mountains and forests, but our first stop is here in Monte Rio along the Russian River. So named for what should be pretty obvious reasons now. This river was first explored by the Russian explorers coming up from Fort Ross and exploring a little deeper into the interior here. This river is also the largest river in this area, Sonoma County, and the second largest river in all of California, after the Sacramento River. To actually get to the site of Fort Ross, we had to drive quite a ways up into the hills of Sonoma County. By following the Russian River, we eventually made our way out to the coast, where the Russian River enters the Pacific Ocean near Bodega Bay. From there, it was a bit more of a drive along the scenic and beautiful, but often very windy, coastal Highway 1, until we eventually arrived at our destination of Fort Ross. Starting in about 1803, the Russians began making expeditions down the coast here to California. Up in Alaska, where they had already established their colonies, it was clear that they weren't making enough food to actually survive for the entire year. So they were looking for a place where they could continue their fur trading and hunting and start to actually produce their own food for a more permanent colony. Eventually, after nearly a decade of searching, they decided on this area here, just north of the San Francisco Bay Area, which at the time was about as far north as the Spanish colonies and missionaries had gotten. The site here was chosen for a number of reasons, primarily its defensibility against possible Spanish attacks, which they were worried about since, at the time, in 1812, and actually the entire period that this fort was operating, the Spanish still considered this part of their territory. Of course, the site was chosen for a number of other benefits. It had access to redwood forest for timber, it had a lot of pasture land for raising cattle and grain, and of course, the ocean right here. Although this isn't as good of a natural harbor as a place like Bodega Bay, a little bit south of here, it still provided easy access to the sea otter and seal populations, which they hunted for fur. Behind me, you can see the central courtyard of the fort. It's a pretty standard square design with 2 blockhouses on opposite corners, a chapel, a warehouse, and the manager's office. Some of these buildings are original constructions, but most of them have been rebuilt over the years and renovated. Now, there's actually a reason we decided to come here to Fort Ross for our visit to California, and that's because this building back here is actually a reconstruction that my father worked on. In 2012, to celebrate 200 years of history here, they decided to remodel and rebuild this storehouse here. So my dad, a carpenter in the area, actually helped to build this structure. But I'm not going to go into details about How they built it, I'll let him do that instead.
We cut all these pieces in a shop in Katati, and they're like 20 feet long, these 20-foot 12 by 12s we had to move around. And we had to cut every end to fit together, with a dovetail joint on the ends. And then all those rectangles you see on the wall there, that indicates where a wall goes up in the other direction at 90 degrees. And they look like it's just a square set in two notches, but the notches weren't just a square cut notch. They were all beveled up, from the outside in. They beveled up, and the pieces the tenons that sat in there were beveled down. So when you laid them together, they would hold it, tight and, in place. We built it in 3 sections. First we cut all the things for about the bottom 10 feet or so. Then we cut the pieces for the second and the third. And it would take us about a month or a month and a half to cut them all. We'd pack them all up. They were loaded on trucks and brought up here from Katati. And there was a construction crew here that would put them together. And they would put everything we made, that took us that much time to make, they'd put together in 3 days, because they just had to stack them all up, and everything that they put together fit perfectly. The guys would come back and say, yeah, we had no problem putting this together, and it went fast. And that's how we did it. And it was fun. We had a good time.
Unfortunately, we couldn't go inside that building since it's mostly used for storage, but most of the other structures on the site are open to the public, and you can take a look inside to see what life might have been like during the height of the colonial period. The chapel here actually is known for its special design. This circular chamber up here, kind of like a barrel, it helps to reverberate the sounds inside and make them sound a little more ethereal, a little bigger, a little more expressive. And it's said that they thought it helped to send their messages upward to God more efficiently. In any case, it does sound really impressive in here, and it's still really beautiful. I think this was the first and so far only Orthodox chapel that I've ever been to. We'll see, that might change in the future. The operation here was actually surprisingly successful. They had a good relationship with the local indigenous population, and they were able to manufacture and produce enough goods to even send a surplus of food up north to the Alaskan colonies. However, after about 30 years, things started to turn around. For one, the sea otter population was beginning to decline here, and they weren't making as much money from selling the furs. Also, although they were making and producing goods, that alone was not enough to support the colony. The last straw came after Mexican independence. The new Mexican government wanted to enforce their claims on this area, so they sent a letter to the Tsar of Russia. However, the Tsar was not a big fan of revolutions for pretty obvious reasons, so he declined the agreement, and therefore he began the process of selling off this land to recoup some of the costs spent. Finally, in 1841, the entire structure and everything associated with it was sold off to a local businessman for about $30,000. A good sum at the time, but not nearly as much as they would have spent on making this place. Today, this area is dedicated to preserving and teaching people about this fascinating part of California history, including not just the Russian colony, but also the indigenous groups and local wildlife of the area. Unfortunately, the sea otter population and the whole ecology of the area still hasn't really recovered from what was done here. Although efforts are underway to bring that population back, it's a long and arduous process. I'll leave a link down below if you'd like to learn a little more about or even support some of the ongoing efforts to protect, conserve, and restore this beautiful area. For us, as the sun set, our time at Fort Ross came to an end, but we had one last thing to do on the coast before heading home. Now, before we head back to where we're staying in Santa Rosa, we have to stop for some fish and chips and clam chowder.
Yay. I love it.
Smells really good. Wow, it's really good.
Been a long time since I've had real fish and chips with malt vinegar. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's perfect. Fort Ross is a really important historical landmark here, but it's just one of a lot of beautiful places to see in California while we take our little stop here before continuing with our adventures. But we'll save our next stop for next time. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and
see you at our next destination.
ciao.
Ciao.